Welcome back, Covalence friends. Today we're going to be going over the basics of the Sequelize library. We're going to go over some of the cool things, the features, as well as some of the nuances that I'm not a big fan of, but we're going to set everything up so that it sets you up for success moving forward. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments below. If you haven't subscribed, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Otherwise, we're going to get right into it. All right, so we're going to use our Sequelize demo repo as a starting point. The link to this repo can be found in the description below, but basically it's just a simple Express server with a user's model already created. And so if you needed to, you could just generate this user model pretty quickly. All it is a first name, last name, and email with underscores set to true and the ID explicitly set. So I prefer to have this ID property in here. You don't need it. Sequelize will handle the ID itself in the model, so you could completely delete this. I prefer to have it because I reference this file quite a bit, and I just like seeing all of the properties. And then I also have underscore true, which I prefer just because I'll keep the the column names consistent and just everything snake cased. When you do set underscore true, make sure you actually have the table name lowercase as well. So they actually set all the table names as lowercase to keep things the same on every platform like Linux and PC and whatnot. So make sure that you actually set this lowercase. If you followed the last video I did on the Sequelize demo, right, or setting this up, I think I forgot to actually explicitly put this in the video. And so if you ran db migrate with a capital U users, just make sure you undo the migration. I believe it's db migrate undo, which is db:/migrate:/undo. And then you can just change the U to be lowercase and then run db migrate again, and it will recreate the table, and you should be good to go. Now, the only other thing I want to make sure is that you have to put auto increment true when you specify this ID explicitly, right? So if you leave this out, if you just put integer and primary key true, it's going to actually demand that you pass in an ID value. That's a very weird thing that I don't love about Sequelize. It's not very consistent when it comes to those things. But once you have everything kind of templated out, I believe it works really, really well. So that's my one criticism to the library. And we're going to now generate a new model, which is going to be associated with the user model, right? And so we're going to have a one-to-many relationship with a table called to-dos. So the model is going to actually be just to-do. And so we want to cd into Sequelize, the Sequelize folder, and we're going to npx Sequelize CLI model generate, and the -- name is going to be to do, and the -- attributes is going to be user ID, which is going to be an integer, and text, which is going to be a string. All right, so we've generated our to-do model and we've generated our migration. And so in the model itself, we're going to just copy over the ID with all the properties that we need. And we're also going to copy over the underscore true property. So we have this model defined now. And when we go into the migration here, we have to remember to lowercase this table. I wish the CLI actually had a ability to pass in that you want it to be underscored, and then it did all that yourself. I believe that'd be a pretty easy change because it gets kind of tiring deleting all this, but it would be easy for them to add that. Hopefully they do that at some point. So finally, this user ID, we just have to actually we want to create this foreign key. So there's a references property, and we're going to define the model as users, and the key is going to be ID. And so again, this is another kind of weird inconsistency that I don't love. When we're referencing the model here, you would think that it would be the model name, right? But no, it actually is the name of the table. So we actually have to make sure that we put the table name in there. And I think the way that I kind of organize this in my brain is that all the migrations reference each other. They don't reference the models, right? All the models will reference each other, but the models don't reference the migrations, and the migrations don't reference the models. So if you kind of keep them separate as separate entities in your head, I feel like things get a little bit easier organization-wise. But yeah, so we have to just make sure that everything is consistent there. And finally, what we're going to do is we're actually going to add our association. So the model that has the foreign key on it, we can call a function this.belongs to, and we're going to pass in models.user, and foreign key is going to be user ID. And so you just remember that when you have the foreign key on the model itself, you call this belongs to function because you're saying that this key belongs to this model, right? And so now we're going to create the association on the user because we need to define the association on both ends. And the way that we're going to do this is that there's two main functions you're going to call when the foreign key is not on the model, and it's this.has1 or this.hasmany. And so has1 would obviously, this is dependent on the relationship. If there would be a one-to-one relationship, you would have the has1. Otherwise, you have the hasmany because models, well, in this particular case, a user has many to-dos, right? And so we're going to say models.todo, and the foreign key is going to be user ID. All right, awesome. So we have our association set up. The only thing we have to do now is we're going to run the migration. And so let's go ahead and npx Sequelize CLI db migrate. All right, so we've migrated our to-do. We actually have everything migrated over. So if we wanted to, we can go ahead and check. Let's refresh our tables here. And we have our to-dos table and we have our users table, right? So we're good as far as the actual tables go and the table creation goes. So what we can do now is we can start actually adding things to our API. So if we go into our API here, we can see that, again, this is from the Express Basics repo, I believe, that was already in here. So we have our API. We chose to actually version it as API v1. We have a users route already, and we have a error handler for routes that don't exist. So one other thing that could be smart is we could add an actual, let's see, it's not going to like all these, so we actually have to help TypeScript a little bit. So we're going to pass in request, right, response, and next function, and we need to make sure that these go in here. So response and router. All right, so we have our function defined now, and what we can do is if there is an error, we'll just pass in error.message as the response, and then we should be all good as far as handling this error goes, right? So this would be if the route doesn't exist, and this would be if an error occurs in one of our routes, right, that does exist. And so we have this users route right here. We can go ahead and go to it, and we have a get. We're going to go ahead and just delete this for now since we're actually going to be grabbing real data, and we're going to actually get something with an ID. And then for this, we're going to only have a route at the base, and we're going to be posting data there. So again, we're actually going to have a users router, and then we're going to have a to-dos router. So we can go ahead and create our to-do.ts file. We can just basically copy this entire file here, and instead of users, it's going to be to-dos. So we're going to export the default to-dos function, and we're not going to need a get, although you could have it, but for our case, we're just going to have a post, and it's just going to be creating a single to-do, and our user should be good now. And then in our index, we can import, we need the API index, right? So in our API now, we're going to import to-dos from to-do, and we are going to add a /to-dos route, and it's going to be the to-dos router function here, right? So we're calling this, we're good to go as far as that goes. And then for our actual API here, we're gonna need to import, well, we can't import because we don't have the actual Sequelize set up for TypeScript. We'll probably end up doing that in a future video, but for right now, we're going to just say const user equals require, and we're going to go back to the Sequelize models folder, and it's going to reference that index.js in Sequelize models, and it's going to pull out that user, right? So it's that class user that's exported. And now when we want to get something, we can use the parameter IDs. So it's going to be an async function. Both of these are going to be async. And what we're going to do is we're going to grab the user, so const u equals await, and it's going to be user dot. So there's multiple functions that we can actually use here, but so for instance, there is a find by PK function where you can just pass in the ID. This would work for this, but I tend to find that more often than not, I'm using the find one function, and this works exactly the same way. You're just able to specify what you need in here. So what we can do is we can find one, and then the object's going to contain a where clause, and the ID is going to be request.params.id. And so again, if you wanted to, you could use the find by PK. That's what it's defined for. But I like to kind of use the same functions everywhere. I don't need to mix and match, right? And I want to showcase that this find one has the ability to kind of put these conditionals in there, and it has like significantly more flexibility. But if you wanted to just use the find by PK, it's probably smarter just because all we're doing is literally finding by PK. And so you may want to actually cast that to a number as well. And so now we're going to be looking for this u. And when we do res.json to pass things back, the one thing that we need to make sure is that for this particular case, this u is not going to be just a normal JavaScript object, right? This is a SQL object or a SQL class of some sort. Has a ton of data on it. It's a massive object. You don't want to pass that whole thing back. And I don't even think it'll let you, to be honest. I think it errors. And so what you need to actually do is you need to call u.toJSON. And this function essentially converts the Sequelize class or Sequelize object into just a plain old JavaScript object that contains only the properties from the column names, right? And so you're going to be passing that res.json back. And one thing I literally just thought about this is that we're not setting the status here. And so I would make sure that we actually set this status as well. So res.status 404, res.status, we do 500 there. And then we pass back that error message. So sorry, that was a little, literally my brain just thought about that. We don't need to set, you could set the status to 200 here. We should be good to go though. And yeah, so everything looks good as far as finding it. Now for posting it, we are going to do something very similar. So we can essentially just kind of copy this here. We could say const model equals request.body. And instead of finding, we're going to create. And then when we pass in the value, we could just pass in model, but I feel like it's a little bit better to do some kind of sanitization and get good, get used to practicing good practices. And so we're going to be passing in the values themselves. So model.first name, last name, model.last name, and email, model.email. And then in this case, you can actually sanitize these values as well. We're not going to worry about it for the demo purposes, but if you needed to, I think Sequelize does a decent job of making sure that things are safe as far as what you pass into this, because obviously there's a string, you can only pass in a string, and so it'll just actually put those values in there as parameters. And so everything should be safe in terms of being able to actually insert values, or I don't think somebody's gonna be able to drop your table from this code here. But again, there's always edge cases here, so I'd recommend being as safe as possible. And in this particular case, you may want to run some validation first on the email. And so it's always good to kind of just create your model explicitly and make sure that you see in the code exactly what's happening, right? So if I just passed in model, everything would be dictated by the front end and not by the server itself. And so I like to be very explicit with how things are created, and I feel like it just ends up making your code significantly better, right? And so you create this user, you pass back the user that's been created, and we should be good as far as that goes. So again, we can go ahead and kind of copy this over to our to-do as well. Let's change, instead of u, we're going to use t. And this needs to be an async function. And instead of user, we're actually going to import to do. And it's going to be to-do.create. And instead of these values, we're going to have user ID and text. And we're just got to change where we're grabbing these. And we should be good as far as creating the to-do goes. So we have our post for to-dos. We have our user, get, and post. And so now we can start kind of translating things over to the front end. And so if we go back to our public here, you can see that I actually added things ahead of time for this. So I'll post this repo in the description below. You can go ahead and grab the code in here and just copy this. This obviously has nothing to do with the demo, but this is our index.html. All it is really two sections here. We have an add user and a get user, and then inside of our get user, there's two separate forms where we can add a to-do to an existing user. And it's very basic code. I basically added no styling as well, so it's going to be ugly as all hell, but this is not, making it look pretty is not the importance of this demo, right? And so we just want to be able to add a user to our database, and then we want to be able to retrieve users, show their to-dos, and then add to-dos as well. And so the way that I had this set up, when I add a to-do, it doesn't automatically put it into the user, because what I want to be able to do is add to-dos and then just get the user again and then show you that the database values have changed, right? And so we have all of our code here in the HTML, and then I've also added a little bit of CSS. It's not worth showing you guys, but the actual TypeScript file here that's going to be running on the front end basically just grabs all the elements that we need. It's pretty straightforward. I would suggest using a framework like React, but I just did pretty much everything vanilla here. And we have a populate user function, we have some button text, and then we have our form submission functions here. So when we add, we're just doing a fetch call to we're posting to API v1 users, and then we're populating that user in the DOM. Again, for getting, we're just grabbing the user, and then for submitting it to do, we're posting to API v1 to do. So for getting the user, we're just calling a get on that with the ID value. And so the only other thing I see in here that we might want to do, let's see. No, this looks good. So yeah, we're setting current user to null if the user doesn't exist, and we're hiding that to do. So everything looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and close up some of these files, and then we're going to run this thing, see what happens. I've never actually tested this code, so I'm a little scared. npm run dev, or let's cd back one and then npm run dev. All right, so everything looks good. Haven't had any problems. We connected correctly. We are going to go ahead and open up localhost 3000. Everything started, so things so far so good. We can go ahead and create a user here. So we're gonna do Matt Morgan and then test@test.com. We're gonna click submit, and it looks like we actually did get a user. So we have successfully gotten users here. It didn't actually populate the DOM though. It did populate the ID. So let's go ahead and just take a look real quick at what could be on. If I call get, it does get it. If we look 200, okay. We got created at, updated at, right? Email, first name, last name. With the underscore property true, it does convert this back to being a camel case value. So if you need to reference these, you do have to use the actual camel case for created at and updated at. That's another thing I found very weird. You'd think that it would convert everything, but no, it actually only converts created at and updated at, which not a big fan of that either. So Sequelize, I would change that. I think this is inconsistent. There may be a setting that I don't have that's correct. So if somebody figures it out, please drop it in the comments and I'll make a little update video. But again, we can call, John Doe and test2 submit. All right, so now we have 1 and 2. If we add it to do, grab groceries, add to do. So we actually had, all right, so that looks good. The user ID is 2. All right, we have created at, updated at, text is, grab groceries, and the ID is 1. So all of these are actually being put into our database. If we want, we can actually go into users and we can view the data, and we can see that these values are in there. View data. All right, so we're actually setting these correctly. One thing we're not doing is displaying the users. So let's go ahead and try and do some live debugging here and figure out what's going on. So let's see, we have this, we have our username, user email, user to-dos. So if we go into our JavaScript here, get element activate, username, user email, user to-dos. All right, so user.name.value. Well, that'll do it. So this should be text content. All right, so now let's go ahead and go back to the code here, and we're gonna just get user with ID 1. There we go, Matt Morgan, test@test.com. We don't have any to-dos right now, but if we go ahead and go to 2, right? So if we look at the actual network request, we can see that the model itself has that. Now if we get 2, we can kind of see that we have John Doe test2 at test.com, right? So we have the email, we have the name showing correctly. The one thing we don't have is the to-dos, right? So we know that John Doe here has a to-dos. He's got to go grab groceries, but we're not actually passing this down in the model. So how do we do this, right? Obviously, we could go back here. We could actually grab the to-dos separately, add them to the model before we return it. Or what we can do is actually just use the function that is included already in this. So when we have find one here, there is a ability to include more than just this where clause here, right? And so there's significantly more properties that we can pass in on this object. So the where clause is one of the properties. We could also pass in attributes, right? So if we wanted to, we could pass in an array of attributes. Let's say we only wanted to do first name, right? So this allows you to be a little bit more explicit and only grab certain properties. So this could keep your data sets low. If you don't want to be passing back the entire object, you can only pass back what's needed. And so we can go ahead and remove that for now, since we want to pass back all the attributes. We don't have enough things on there, but let's say you don't want to pass back a password, right? So you could only pass back the attributes that you need, and you could strip out that password. Or let's say you only wanted to pass back an ID for something, right? You just specify ID there. So that's what I find is probably most common, is the ID scenario, where you only want to pass back an ID, so your attributes would just include ID. Now there's another ability to do an include, right? And so this include is going to be an array, and it includes all the associations that you want, right? And so you're going to actually pass in an object here, and the object is going to have a model, and it has the optional ability to have attributes and a where clause and all those things, right? And so it can get really, really complex, and the flexibility is pretty amazing when it comes to this. And so in this particular case, you need to actually grab to do, and you're going to pass in the model as to do, right? And so now what this will allow you to do is this is going to be all of the attributes on the to do model. And so it's going to pass back user ID. In our case, we probably don't need all of it, so we could actually just pass back text. And we'll do ID as well, just to kind of show you how this works. So we're going to pass back ID and text. And so now when we do the get call, it's going to include the do's, but on the post, it's not going to include that, right? And so we're going to see kind of the difference here and exactly how this works. So let's pull this back up. And now when we get number 2, all right, we actually have our to-dos, and then it includes it as capital T, right, which is always interesting, I find. So you have to be prepared for that. And again, I actually think I don't have that correct in my code right now, and that's why we didn't see it. So it's we have to make sure that here it's capital T in our model. So now it's if not u.todos, we're going to be referencing the capital T, right? And so pull this back up. Now when we actually refresh this, we're going to grab 2, and we're going to see that we have our to-dos listed there, right? Now if we do, again, we're pulling this back. When we create, we're never going to have a to-do anyway. Let's just say Greg, Jones, test3 at test.com. All right, so now we have Greg Jones. We can start adding to-dos. Shop. All right, we could have read and dance. She's going to shop, he's going to read, he's going to dance. You may want to just clear that too after you submit. I feel like that would be nice. Let's go ahead and just add that real quick. So go ahead and after we submit that to do, we're just going to clear the to-do.value equals blank. So when we refresh this, when we grab item 3, we have shop, read, dance, and let's see, we could say code, add to do. All right, now when we re-get this again, we have read, shop, read, dance code. So again, we have another bug. This has just been all sorts of fun, right? If we keep doing this, it clearly does not clear all of the nodes. And so, we'd have to make sure, let's see, if we grab 1, two, shop, grab groceries. So it's not clearing all the nodes. We have to make sure that we actually clear this out. And so let's see, for const n of user.todos.child nodes, right? We're going to remove each child. So it seems like it should be fine. To-dos is get element by ID user to-dos. So let's go ahead and console.log user.todos.child nodes. This is probably something extremely simple. All right, so let's refresh this. All right, our node list is 0, but if we do 3 now, yep, so I believe the problem is that we're actually removing this child and appending the child all at once. And so what you really probably need to do is let this finish first. But let's see, remove child node. So let's see, console.log n, just to kind of make sure. So we have shop and dance being removed. But the issue is that, so the problem is that we're removing a child. Oh, this is basic. All right, so the problem is that we're actually removing the child as we're, so what we have to do here is we actually have the length. So let's rename this, right? So we have, let's see, we go backwards. So for, let's say, let I equals user.todos.child nodes length -1, right? We're going to say while I is greater than or equal to 0 and -i. So we use the wrong function here. We can't just iterate through these because as we're removing it, we're actually lessening the length of this. Its node list is not an array. And so what we're going to do instead is we're going to set it to the last one and then we're going to say that user.todos.remove child, and the child is going to be user.todos.child nodes I. All right, and then we're going to delete this code here. We don't need this console.log anymore. One thing you definitely could do is create a variable for this. So let's go ahead and do that because it looks terrible. So we're going to say const nodes equals user.todos.child nodes, and then we can go ahead and just decrease that a little bit. So I like using more variables than less. And so let's go ahead and we're going to pop this back open. I'm going to grab number 2, grab groceries, grab 3, right? Grab 1, which has none, grab 3, and there's no 4. So we actually get a failed, right? So we have an error. And then, go back to 3. Oh, so we actually crashed the server. So that's good. Our server has crashed. You can see we did not handle the error correctly. So type error cannot read properties null of reading to JSON. All right, so to make things more robust, you go in here and you actually have to add, you could add a global error handler, or you could add try catches in here. So some real life debugging. Again, like I said, I usually never test this code, so I like doing the live testing just to make sure that things are, you get to see exactly how the development process goes. And so again, we're going to try a catch, and then we're just going to send back a status code of 500 here. And then, we can do this for all of these. So again, try catch blocks. And honestly, I always end up doing these anyway, but I was being a little bit lazy. I was hoping that the error function would be called, but that's only if you call next error, right? So you could do next E here, right? The same thing could be done up here. And now this will actually pass in to our error handler. And let's see the to-do file here. It's the last one. And we're just going to call next E. And we're going to pass everything into the try block. All right, so now we have everything in there. We have our try catch blocks, and now we can actually, we'll go ahead, restart. So we call 3, we get Greg Jones. We call 4, we get an error, right? And you just get a 500, and you can see the error cannot read properties of null, reading to JSON, right? So that's a strange error. You may want to actually have additional better error handling than that, and just say that, obviously null was returned from the get user because that doesn't exist. So in here, right, U was null. So you could check if, is object U, or if not you, or if not you, then you just throw a new error, user does not exist. So if not you, throw new error, user does not exist. All right, and then in our app.ts, if current user is null, you can actually set all of these values still. So you can just say that you could hide to do, and then you could say that U equals a different value. So you could say something like, here, let's, instead of returning, why don't we say current user is null, and then U equals first name, last name, and then email, right? And then it doesn't like this, it's missing ID. So we'll say ID is also empty, or we'll just say null. Doesn't like this, so we actually have to cast it to any, which is fine. You could remove it as any, but you could just remove it as number and any, right? All right, so that's just kind of a little TypeScript hack. So now we're just going to set all these back to nothing if the user is null, which will be good. And then, we need a show to do. But what we could say is that we could say if let no user equals not you, if no user, and then down here, if not no user, we're going to set this. All right, so now we're actually deleting all that info. And then we could say if there was an error, right, we could show an error somewhere, and then we could actually show what that error was. So again, you could actually put it in the button text if you wanted. So let's see, button text could say error, but if we wanted to, we could actually put e.message in here. So for this particular one, we're going to do it in the get, and we're going to say that instead of just error, we're going to say e.message, right? And this is going to be error. It doesn't like that you want to specify it explicitly as an error, even though it is an error. But again, that's just a TypeScript limitation. All right, so we're going to refresh. We're going to say 3, right? Now when we say 4, it actually says user does not exist, right? And so what we get is we actually have to populate got user here beforehand. All right, so we're always going to populate this. Oh, actually not in this case, right? We don't want to populate it if this is the case. And so what we want to actually do here is we only want to populate with this. Otherwise, we want to, in here, we're going to just populate user null, undefined. There we go. It doesn't like this. All right, so it's going to be just null. And then in our populate user, it has to be iUser or null. Else, user is an iUser. So again, the types get kind of annoying. Let's see. iUser, if no user, else you set you here. So yeah, so you is definitely, it's probably just a better idea to just say, all right, we're gonna just do this for now. Going to pass in any null for populate user. All right, and then so we can do this in all of our error handlers. All right, so that'll actually go ahead and remove that. So if we have 3 now, and then we have 4, it just says user does not exist. ID gets set to null, right? And again, probably don't want it to be null. So if you want to do an even additional error handling, you're just going to set that to be an empty string instead. All right, we're making things perfect here, people. It has to be perfect. ID 3, ID 4, ID 3, ID 2, ID 1. All right, so you have your to-dos. You can keep adding to-dos if you wanted to, but all of these are coming from the database. And so again, user does not exist. And you're good to go. So if you have any questions, definitely drop them in the comments below. Otherwise, see you soon. All right, so I hope you guys learned a little something, and I hope you enjoyed the content. And I hope you even had fun kind of watching the live debugging a little bit. So, in real life, things aren't perfect. Today wasn't perfect. I think my green screen even got messed up for most of it. So I apologize for any of the quality, but this is real life. This is how things work. And I hope you guys can appreciate that a little bit. And if you have any questions, feel free again to drop them in the comment section below, or if you have any additional content ideas that you'd love to see us, make something on, definitely let us know. We'd love to make content specifically for you. Otherwise, we're just going to keep pumping out our own ideas and our own stuff. So stay tuned, subscribe, and be on the lookout. See you soon.